A woman asked Joe Biden a question about Medicare for all. And you can't even say it's a question. She basically made a statement, but put a question mark at the end of the statement. They're on Lawrence O'Donnell. Stacey Abrams is with him. And when this audience member asked this question, Joe Biden lies and then recommends Cobra. And again, I make the point that you're running in a presidential election and you're recommending a program that has, what is this, 16% approval overall? Medicare for all? Whoa, right here. 88% of Democrats, 6 to 8% of independents, 46% of Republicans. This came out 4/20/4/20, meaning Medicare for all only got more popular as the pandemic hit and people realized that the notion of healthcare tethered to your job when your job is not a fixed quantity is problematic, to say the least, especially during something like now where that kind of makes that point that much more emphatically clear. Well, Joe Biden is still not on board for Medicare for all. And I would make the point that says if Joe Biden is not on board for Medicare for all, then Joe Biden just doesn't want my vote. Look, COVID-19 is a wild card. If Joe Biden was just running against Trump one-on-one and there was no COVID-19, I would say Trump was going to beat the stuffing out of him. But with the COVID-19 thing, Trump being incompetent, that makes it difficult to govern when you have an economic crisis and a health crisis. Nevertheless, I'm going to let you hear Joe Biden's response, a lie, followed by telling her to back or to go for a policy that basically still have people paying out the nose. And again, it's not popular. If anybody has been on Cobra, or let me say it this way, nobody that has ever been on Cobra would recommend Cobra. That's how I know Joe Biden doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. When I heard this clip the first time, I was like, that doesn't sound right. Federal government is doing that? That doesn't sound right at all. Because it wasn't. Only thing you had to do was look it up. Either he's lying or he's incompetent. And if we're being honest, it's probably a little bit of both. Welcome to a Groundhog's Day early morning soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. We like to say this content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you for allowing me to do it. I don't like Joe Biden, and I've liked him less as this campaign has moved on. I found him to be a flagrant liar going all the way back to the 80s. I've gotten more aggravated with the way press has treated Joe Biden, meaning they knew he was lying in the 80s about the civil rights thing. They didn't bring it up. They knew he used to plagiarize speeches. So even though he was plagiarizing elements of his policy this time around, they didn't necessarily care. He would lie about South Africa. They wouldn't necessarily bring it up. He would have one atrocious interview after the next, and they would lead him like a child. And so this person who is clearly not up to snuff to do this particular job with a media that has given him the kindest of eyes, well, he is about to go into a general election massively ill-prepared. With, again, one bonus is that Trump is criminally incompetent, and he's dealing with multiple crises. Medicare for all has 88% approval by Democrats. This is one of those cases where I say, go and do your job. The notion that you're not going to back a policy that level of support is out there for, that means you don't want my support. And I would even argue you don't want the support of all of these Sanders supporters that were full bore into that particular program. You must understand, Medicare for all is a pay raise. Like, it's the largest pay raise in a generation. All of those bills that the individual would typically have to pay go away, and you pay it out of your taxes. The situation of people losing their insurance each year because the job tries to find the cheapest insurance that they can find, that goes away. Medicare for all is stability in that situation. I guess I'm trying to make the point that in this period where we're in the middle of a pandemic, it makes it all the more clear that health insurance tethered to a job that is not a fixed quantity is problematic, to say the least, which is why the other industrial countries around the world don't tend to do it that way. They tend to have some level of a single payer system where everybody is covered, paying it through payroll tax. Joe Biden lies, and Joe Biden then spins off into basically a bad policy that is massively unsatisfying.
I'm wondering, it seems appalling that someone who would lose their job in the middle of a pandemic would also lose their health care. And doesn't this seem to make Medicare for all or a single-payer health care seem more important to you?
The quickest way to get that health care is to do two things. In the middle of this pandemic, to make sure that the federal government says no one will have to pay for any cost related to the COVID testing and or follow-up if anything is wrong and you have to be hospitalized. Secondly,
how's that fair? How's that fair? Think about what we're saying for the moment. What Joe Biden just said here. This is not the part where he's lying. I'm just saying the logic of it. You're basically saying that a lot of people got ill. That's true. But people who came down with COVID, what about the guy who's sitting in the other room that has cancer? What about the other person who's sitting in the room that has some other kind of illness? Don't those people also deserve to get covered? Why is COVID unique to you in regards to this one being treated, but not the other person being treated? And why is it fair that that person gets some level of medical care where you're going to cover all of his medical treatments related to this particular illness, but the government is not going to do that for this other illness? I don't understand the logic of this. If you're going to let that guy go bust who has cancer, then shouldn't the COVID person go bust also, just to maintain the same logic of it? Let's keep going.
there are 26 million people who, in fact, have lost their jobs, that their companies, they paid into a health insurance policy they like. There's a thing called Cobra. That means that the portion that the company that can no longer pay in their share of that healthcare policy, that will be paid fully by the federal government while this pandemic lasts. Third,
that's not true. That's not true. I have no idea where he got that from. That's entirely not true. The first thing I did, because I thought nobody in their right mind that has ever used Cobra would recommend Cobra. I think I've told this story before. I had kidney failure going back to when I was 17. And when you get kidney failure, when you have kidney failure, you get automatically are eligible for Medicare. My mom at the time worked for the government, so she was aware of many of the programs that were available, especially from the standpoint of illness. And so you were enrolled for it. If you get a transplant, 3 years after that transplant, they figure, all right, you're doing well enough where you don't necessarily need Medicare anymore. I was working as a software engineer at the time. After 3 years, lost my job, meaning I lost my job around the same month that I hit my 3-year period. So not only did I lose health insurance, I also lost Medicare. Now, after losing your job, they would say, hey, if you give us $500 a month, you can keep your health care. And it's like, how am I going to give you $500 a month when I have literally just lost my job? That's the program that Joe Biden is recommending in the middle of a pandemic. Now, the catch here is the government does not pay all of your expenses, even now. It does not cover all of your costs for Cobra. I have no idea where you got that from. You can look it up yourself. So right here, Democrats introduced a bill in mid-April to help the millions of people like Jimez who find themselves unsure of where to turn. The Worker Health Coverage Protection Act would fully fund the cost of Cobra, a program that allows workers who leave or lose a job to stay on their former company's insurance plan. Cobra currently requires the workers to pay for the entire premium, including the employer's share. The Workers' Health Coverage Protection Act is one bill being considered by Congress as it tries to figure out what to do about the very real healthcare gap for the millions who have lost their jobs and no longer have healthcare. Key term there, being considered. That's not the current law. You have people who basically have to pay those Cobra premiums without a job, or I would imagine at best the 65% being covered. But I have no idea what Joe Biden is talking about here. He's just made that up. He entirely just made that up and misrepresented what Cobra was. That should be a litmus test. It has 88% approval. Litmus test.
The best way to move forward and get it done immediately is to withdraw the lawsuit that the president has to do away with Obamacare and add the public option I am supporting that I have as part of my plan, making sure that everyone...
How? You believe that the Republican Party is going to be more willing to vote for a public option as opposed to voting for Medicare for all. The Republican Party would not even vote for Obamacare, but you believe you're going to be able to get a public option through Congress easier than you would be able to get Medicare for all. Now, it's true that you may run up against resistance to some Democrats from the standpoint of Medicare for all. That is true, but that's more of a bully pulpit thing where you try to enforce your will. And like I said, any policy that you push will get negotiated down. If you're starting in a negotiation, you typically take a maximalist position. It has a reasonable maximalist position, but you take that position because you know during the course of negotiation, you are going to have to give things away in order to get other things. And your position is going to get whittled down, meaning you may start off at Medicare for all, which is the grade A standard, but you may end up with something that is not entirely Medicare for all, but basically gives you the universal coverage that you were looking for. Joe Biden is starting at a public option, and he believes that the Republican Party or that these guys are going to vote his plan through. I don't see it. If they wouldn't vote through Obamacare and they wouldn't give Obama any votes, I don't know why you think you're going to get any for this public option. They're going to fight that tooth and nail. They've been trying to get rid of Obamacare for the past, how many years? They took 40 or 50 votes on getting rid of Obamacare, and you believe you're going to get a public option through. If you're going to push for a big piece of legislation, you should do it right. And the notion that you're going to take that heavy lift in order to get a modest plan that doesn't even cover everybody is just pathetic. I'm sorry. And that's basically the word that I think works for this candidacy. Flagrant liar and pathetic. Joe Biden. Like, share, and subscribe.